Well, welcome everybody to today's Connexus Thursday talk on building social cohesion and online communities. There's some really great speakers, really great learning materials, both trainings, reports, hearing back from experience, and then discussion afterwards. So we're really excited to have this conversation today. I'm Xander Willoughby. I work on Connexus based in DC. Awesome. Well, today we have Hilda, Darini, and Thayer. Really excited to hear from each of you, and I'll get out of the way and hand it to you, Hilda, and get us started.
Thank you, Xander, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk today on the Thursday Talk. And we wanted to talk to you about a piece of work that Search has been increasingly getting engaged in over the past year or so, I would say, around working with digital community stewards. And I'll get a bit more into what that means. But so we really wanted to take the opportunity today to, first of all, explain the problem that we've identified, the problem and the opportunity, I would say at the same time, and then present to you a new tool, like a full training package that we've actually been developing together with our stellar team in Sri Lanka on helping to help us support these communities to work better. So, but I'll very briefly help as center a bit the conversation by presenting to you a research that we did last year. And I'll just give some brief highlights from the research. I just want to start off with a few like key data points that we started looking into over the past 2 years or something, increasingly so during COVID. So just a few key data points for everybody that we're on the same page. So research indicates that about 5 billion people have been accessing social media platforms in 2022 alone, and they spend increasingly amount of time on social media platforms. And of course, COVID brought a real boom of engagement in social media platforms. We also know that 40% of all the social media users use a Facebook group at least once a month, right? So different people, we're talking about 1.8 billion people in total. And this is only Facebook groups, right? A lot of people will also have WhatsApp or Instagram or different types of platforms. And in all these platforms, people increasingly they become a member of online groups. And we also know from research that there's about 70 million individuals out there who are administrators of Facebook groups. So that's a very big quantity of people who are actually creating and managing their own groups. And again, that's only Facebook. Facebook is the biggest, but WhatsApp, Instagram, Telegram, there's many other type of platforms, right? But we also know from previous research that we had done that people tend to experience some of the worst violence online in these digital groups. So people get exposed to different types of hate speech, polarizing messages, harmful content, which tends to circulate a lot on social media platforms, but it's especially in groups, in either closed or semi-closed or open groups, that there's a lot of violence that tends to circulate. And we found in some of our previous research that the most common answer for people when they see violence is actually to disengage. Very few people feel that reporting to the social media platforms will have any impact. Very few people feel equipped to actually engage with people who are propagating violence online. So most people will just disengage, and in the worst case, actually just leave groups, right? So this is for anybody who's creating and managing a group, especially when it's around a social purpose. When there's a breakdown in trust because people see violence, people leave the group, and that's a loss for the one who's managing those groups. And so we as we started to look increasingly more into this data, we just saw a huge untapped potential in a way. If you just look at the sheer numbers of how many people create and manage their own groups, there's a very big potential here to equip those groups to do a better job at managing their groups. And the potential that we see, it lies in many ways, and there's potential both offline and online. So that's an interesting fact to notice. A lot of people use their online groups for mobilizing around a common cause, where you would actually see people get together to provide support to the elderly in their community for COVID, or groups are being increasingly used for very localized forms of humanitarian response to a certain crisis, for example, right? Groups are also used to fight polarization online. People who are able to manage their groups well are really able to engage. They're able to identify myth and disinformation in their group. And so they're able to also have conversations with their groups that keeps hate speech down. Groups are often also used to raise awareness around many different topics, from climate change over LGBTQ rights, over a lot of things that keep people busy. And they're an interesting space, especially for people who would be considered minorities or live kind of on the margins within their own society. Within those groups, they often find a protected space where they can share experiences, they can share their feelings, they can rally together around what they feel is important, and they can do so across borders also, right? And the other interesting thing that we found is that digital stewards really consider themselves as a new form of leadership. They almost feel like they're just the leaders of tomorrow, and they have very inclusive type of leaderships. Anybody can become a community steward online. Anybody can create one, and it's the better stewards who will create the bigger groups and will be able to engage the largest groups. And they feel like they have some type of like really a forum where they can almost like in a democratic way give voice to a lot of people. But the community stewards in the research that we've done, they also express a lot of needs. And these are very real needs that people have based on the challenges that they're seeing. So first of all, of course, as I was saying, a lot of group admins and moderators kind of get into this role almost like in a haphazard way. Like they feel like they want to set up a small group, which then all of a sudden grows, they get more members. And a lot of people, when they create their own group, they really underestimate the time and the effort that it's going to take to manage the group, right? And especially when it comes to specific capabilities to handle conflict and disagreements within their group, a lot of the stewards totals that they feel ill-equipped to do so. A lot of the stewards also often find that there can be disruptive actors and bots who infiltrate their groups, sometimes, especially groups who are groups that represent more minority groups. For example, they've had the practice of a double agent, almost like infiltrating, who poses as somebody from that minority group, but then actually is there to take private and personal information from the members and then shares that on other platforms. And people face real offline and online threats because of that. We see that also stewards face a real challenge when there's a sudden surge in members or surge in interaction. Sometimes groups overnight, for whatever reason, can go from like 100 members to 1,000 members. So then all of a sudden, that one person or that small group of people who's managing that group, they face a lot of challenges in keeping up with all those interactions, and they feel like they have to almost like in real time be able to respond to any messages that come in. So there's a real challenge here for them to handle type of sudden surges. A lot of them also spoke about the emotional burden that it brings, especially those who have groups that talk about more sensitive topics. So there's a risk for burnout because of the time consumption that it takes. But there's also really a risk for emotional burden because people almost like start sharing their personal stories and direct messaging with the group admins. And so it creates really a heavy burden on the shoulders that these stewards are carrying. And then maybe a last one that I'll just mention is that a lot of stewards also mentioned to us that they feel they're not getting enough support from the social media companies themselves, targeted support for their role, that there's not enough tools that are available to them, including tech tools to help them manage their groups, to help them identify, for example, when there's misinformation spreading on their page. And they also feel undervalued and not recognized enough by the platforms. They feel that because of the sheer numbers that they reach, that they play a very important role, and that social media platforms are not recognizing them sufficiently for that. I'll just end with a few key recommendations. Then I want to hand it over to Darini. So the few recommendations that we made in the report is to specifically that social media platforms should start looking at really creating tools for stewards to manage when they face these sudden increases in membership or in interaction. One of the things that we're suggesting, for example, is that there's a built-in step that when a steward sees all of a sudden there's an increase in members, that he or she or they get invited to go through a series of trainings, that they get access for free to additional tech tools that would help them manage their groups. We are also recommending that social media platforms make tech solutions directly available to stewards so that they can better handle harmful content, so that an individual steward doesn't have to like go through each and every single message on their group to identify manually any misinformation that may be circulating, but that there's algorithms that are built in that stewards can make use of. Certainly, we're recommending that stewards will be equipped with specific skills and opportunities to create healthy online environment and create their own well-being and those of their members. And one of the skills that, the training toolkit that Darini is going to present is really focusing on that recommendation, right? So it's really built around the needs that those stewards have. But another way that we can provide for well-being of stewards is something that they express themselves is more opportunities for relationship building between stewards and almost like a mentorship type of peer-to-peer support system between stewards. And then lastly, and that's what I was referring to earlier, that digital stewards would be better recognized and feel more valued for the leadership that they bring to their groups and for the large influence that they can hold over these groups, both in positive and negative ways, and so that they're increasingly recognized by social media platforms and other actors for the role that they play. And I'll keep it to that. I'll happily pass it over to Darini, who can actually go much more now into the tools that we are developing to help to support these stewards better.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Hannah. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the whole process of how we started working on this Digital Community Stewards project, which we also call the DCS project. When we realized that we wanted to work with admins and moderators, one of the first things that we learned was that there is next to nothing in terms of existing literature on this particular group. We noticed that there was a lot of toolkits available, a lot of research available on working with activists, working with journalists, or even working with influencers. But there was literally nothing in terms of working with digital community stewards. One of the very few resources that we used for building this curriculum it was a study published by the Governance Lab. It was called The Power of Virtual Community. So it was one of the very few resources we had to work with when we were developing this. And when we were developing these modules or this training curriculum, one of the approaches that we used, or the main approach we used, was something called the dilemma approach. Because even based on the very limited existing research, something that we learned was that this particular target group doesn't really understand they need training, right? They didn't understand they need capacity building. So it was very difficult to convince someone that they need, capacity building when they don't realize it's something that they need. So we used this dilemma approach where we came up with a bunch of problems or dilemmas that these digital community stewards might be facing. So there are 9 dilemmas that we came up with before before we finalized the training curriculum. And each dilemma is phrased in a way that is more relatable to a digital community steward. For example, instead of saying you need to be more inclusive, you need to be more diverse, we said, I want to expand the numbers and diversity of my group. Instead of saying make your group more, cybersecurity, focus on cybersecurity, digital safety, we came up with a prompt that says, I want to keep myself and my members safe. Because these might be actual things digital community stewards might be feeling or might be thinking of, but they have no idea how to do that. Because as Hilda was saying, they have no training, they have not had training, and a lot of people come into this responsibility without knowing that it requires actual skills, tools to do it well or to do it safely. So once we came up with these 9 different modules, what we did was to see whether it actually works, because we didn't really have anything to go with. So what we did was conduct a pilot training. So this pilot training was conducted last year in Dubai. It was partly done physically in person, and the rest of it was done online. So we did 6 modules in person and we did 3 modules online. And the purpose of this pilot training was for us to learn whether these modules work, whether we got the right content, whether the dilemma which worked. And most of the learnings, Hilde already mentioned, it's part of the research report. But some of the very interesting things we learned was that this particular curriculum, the way we later kind of designed it and reworked it after this training, was because we learned not all digital community stewards need all 9 modules, or not all digital community stewards relate to all 9 dilemmas. Because some of these groups, we had one group that only had like 12 members because it was a very private group. It was a focus group that was for a particular committee of people who were trying to work with a larger group of people. And then there was another group that had like 10,000 people that was working with like 10,000 young people. So depending on the nature of the group, depending on the objective of the group, the kind of module or the subject that they were interested in was very different. Some of these stewards were interested in dealing with, building the number of the group. Some people didn't want that. Then others were interested in making their group more inclusive. There were, of course, some modules that were relevant for all of them. For example, the first module is called member engagement, meaning we want other members to engage, not just the admin. I'm sure we've all been part of WhatsApp groups where only one person is texting or one person is saying something, right? So this is a dilemma or a struggle for admins because they are the only ones who are keeping this group alive. They are the only ones who are posting. So then there were modules like that, but we realized that we really need to identify a way to kind of make sure that these modules are relevant without feeling like, oh, I have to do all 9 modules in order to be, a successful digital community steward. So after this pilot training, we reworked some of the modules. We designed it in a way that a trainer can take these modules and do any course in any order. So even though it's in a particular order, you can do module 9 first, you can do module 2 after, or module 5 later. You can also combine some of the modules depending on what kind of group or what kind of people you're talking to, where your community is from. For example, we learned that in South Asia, including in Sri Lanka and India, Facebook groups are very, very common. But when we did our trainings, we noticed that Facebook groups are not very common in the African region, but they are more likely to have text-based groups like on WhatsApp or on Telegram. We also noticed that more sensitive the group is, the more anonymous or private the group is, they are more likely to value platforms like Discord instead of Facebook. So it was very interesting to see how we can capture all of this in like a single curriculum. So we did our best. If you go through it, you can see that it's very flexible and that you can, jump around the modules and create combinations that work best. And based on the curriculum, it's now up online and it's quite easy to use because we have a facilitator's guide for the trainer. We have a booklet for the participant. We have PPTs that are designed, but that can be customized according to your own requirements. We also have supplementary documents like activities, worksheets, different things that you can use for every single module, right? So it's basically about taking it and customizing it according to your, own region and the online communities that that are popular in that region. So once we put all the resources up online, we wanted to see how trainers or peace builders would make use of this. So that led to our second training, which we did in May of this year, where we did a training of trainers in Sri Lanka. We got 9 different peace builders from 9 different countries. And these peace builders were mostly individuals who were working with research, but we also had one youth representative who was from a youth group. And we introduced these modules to them, the curriculum to them and the tools. And we are currently in the process of encouraging them to do this training or part of this training in their own region. So we're very excited to see the learnings from their own communities, what they learn by, doing these modules, because all of these people are experienced with, doing trainings for journalists, for activists, but they've never done a training for digital community stewards. So we're very interested in seeing what they learn and what we can learn through this process. And finally, this is where we are right now. It's a bit of a long project, but in terms of where we are right now and where we intend to go, one of the things that we learned through this project is that while we do want to encourage peace builders and activists and, non-governmental organizations to work with digital community stewards, to prioritize them as an important target group, we also want to make sure that these tools and these skills and this information is accessible directly to digital community stewards, right? Because like I said, not all of them know that they need training. And secondly, not all of them feel comfortable attending a public training or something in person or even online because they don't want to identify themselves as an admin or a moderator if it's a private group. So which is why we are currently developing an online course. And this online course is being developed on EDAP. And it's being developed in a way that where we have 9 different courses in the course library, and the community steward can pick any of the courses, a course that is relevant to them, and do it online. Each module, if you're doing it in person as a training, it will take around 3 hours. But if you're doing it online as an online course, it will take around 60 minutes, right? So we are developing it in a way where, again, you can do one course, or if it's relevant for you, you can do more than one. This is one of the ways in which we're trying to make this content more accessible. Because when we did the TOT, one of the learnings we had was not everyone would attend a training. Not everyone would be interested in attending a training. So that's it in terms of what we've developed and what we've achieved so far and where we are going. I just want to emphasize the fact that one of the main reasons why we are prioritizing digital community stewards is that they are incredibly overlooked in terms of digital peace building work that's happening in any region. But the fact that they're overlooked and also the power that they have is extremely undermined, in the sense that if I share a post that is, harmful, it will only be exposed to whoever is following me or whoever is in my, network. But if a digital community steward shares something in a group, or if somebody in a group shares something, everybody in that group has access to it, right? So imagine this group has 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. And imagine those people will share that with someone and it goes, right? It gets bigger. So this particular target group has a huge responsibility. They have a huge power, but they are unaware that they have it and that they can use it to reduce online harm and to, reduce misinformation and disinformation online. And one last thing I will touch on is the fact that Hilda spoke about. One of the biggest learnings from this project is the lack of community among community stewards. Because when we did the pilot study, they learned more from each other just as much as they learned from us. They were sharing strategies that they used. They were talking about, oh, what do you do when somebody acts up in a, group chat? How do you handle that? How do you, try to kind of tell someone to be respectful without sounding mean? They had very practical experiences and, tips that they can share. So something we really want to encourage through these online courses is to connect these digital community stewards to each other, because these people are not admins and moderators of a football group or a group about Game of Thrones or whatever, right? They are admins and moderators of social groups. In our pilot, we had people who were managing groups for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. There was one person who was managing a group for divorced Muslim women. There was another group on youth empowerment. There was another on animal rights. So these people are more likely to be targeted in terms of being harassed and bullied. So it's very important that we get that support we need, get them the support they need, and also connect them in terms of resources and experience. So yeah, I think that's it from me.
Thank you, Hilda and Tarini. I'll hand the floor over to Thayer. Thayer, go ahead.
Yeah, hello all. It's evening here in Jordan, so good evening. Happy to share my experience with you about my experience and the impact happening on the ground after the community stewards digital training. So first of all, let me thank Darini and all the team here for the efforts happened on the ground back in Dubai and online even after that, after being in Dubai. So thanks for all the team for these moments and the training, because it was effective and it has a great impact for me personally and my team in Jordan. So the first thing I want to echo what Darini said before about working with the digital community stewards. So talking about stewards itself, I mean the word stewards here is a key word in this training, because we are not talking about the people who are admin on page or things like that are being let me say representative of an organization or a media company or something like that. We are talking about people who are from the community members who are trying to lead a kind of interactive dialogues or things between the community members, and they are just admins. They are not, they don't have an official representative or something like that. They are community members, but they are stewards. And the word steward is the most let me say keyword here, because stewards are who we know, the stewards. And actually we had a kind of discussion about that back in Dubai in the training, why we called it stewards, because stewards are in the plane We mean when they try to serve you and try to let the journey be okay with you between the two destinations. So that was one of the marvelous things I've been through in my experience. To talk about the community, for the community and from the community, to talk about the community members, that they have the ability to be facilitating great interactive things among their digital tools. Let me say, even it's on WhatsApp or Facebook or wherever it is. The second thing I want to say is that the skills and the knowledge we've got back in the training has its impact. Maybe in one of the evaluation sessions before, I told the team that my team, actually, I work for an NGO called Naya Community Network in Jordan, and we do have kind of digital spaces for people to interact and engage. We have community on WhatsApp, we have groups on Facebook, and also, of course, we have our online page and official website. But now we are talking about the community on WhatsApp and the group on Facebook. So let me phrase it that way. My team got the impact from my pace. Let me say, when I came back from Dubai with the new knowledge, with the new informations, with the things that the thoughts that have been changed from this training or by this training, and started telling them and delivering this knowledge I have, because this is one of the values that we have in the organization. And I think that you do support that, is that you need to let me say, copy these things to your people and tell them more and share the experience and the knowledge you have. So they started on. I remember the first days when I came back from Dubai, they started on figuring out, oh, is there anything called a group, what they call it in WhatsApp, the group rules. Let me say the group rules. Yeah. So we should put that online and let people know about it. We've just put it sometime in the messages in WhatsApp, but when I told them, no, you need to put it there in the rules, and you need to put it there in the Facebook. There is an option in Facebook groups that you need to put there, and people who want to join should mark as that they agree with these rules. And I remember one of the things that I remember I told the colleagues about. It's the thing happened with the graphic designer we have. So one of the graphic designers here in our city wanted to volunteer with us. So we said, okay, you're welcome to be here in our facility, and we can talk about how you can volunteer. And when he came, and he used to be working for Business Matters for to design things for business companies, and it was the first time that he works for something for the community or CBO or community based things. And when we started telling him about the efforts here, he told me that it is something that every graphic designer should know, because we do put designs sometimes without realizing that we are propagating some kind of hate speech or fake news, or putting things in let me say, not in a good way, because this training carried on a lot about the fake news and how we can fight it. Let me say that after that, he arranged a training for graphic designers from the city. More than 12 graphic designers got some sessions from our network about how they can understand that they are, let me say, they are a kind of stewards in the community, because they design things that the people will see and the people will get the information from. So they, let me say that they are participating in shaping the ideas in the members' minds. Let me say, by their drawings and their illustrations and the things that. So if they use a kind of shapes or a kind of illustrations or vectors in their designs, that is not okay to be theirs, that supports a kind of bias or support a kind of unvaluable things in the community. So they should know that. And after the training, we had a good impact with them. They started working on some kind of community based campaigns to support this approach. So these are the main points I wanted to highlight. The experience and the training itself had a good impact for me and my team. And I look forward to work more on the material. I mean, to deliver it to another people, deliver it to another beneficiaries in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you there, and Darady and Hilda. This is really helpful from like a research perspective. And then how do you operationalize that trainings? And then how does that feel as a participant to apply it to your work? Really appreciate you all for joining us today. We'll transition to Q&A/discussion. I'm not sure who the best person to answer this, so I'll throw it out and whoever wants to hop in. Curious about the types of digital communities that we're working with here and how different that looks for, I think Darady, you mentioned like the difference between a group for survivors of sexual assault versus a group for Game of Thrones fans. And then how does that look differently across platform for these like issue-based versus fan-based versus experience-based, things like that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. In terms of narrowing down this group, that was one of the first things we did. Because when we said admins and moderators, that's a huge kind of target. As Nilda was showing, there are millions of administrators and moderators on Facebook alone, right? So that's why we didn't go with the words admins and moderators. We went with digital community stewards. One of the reasons we didn't want to work with what we call interest-based groups was because interest-based groups had leaders, so admins and moderators were constantly changing, right? I might be an admin of a Game of Thrones group, but I might not after the season 6. It was very bad, right? So it's like that, right? If my group or my football team loses, I might not be interested in being part of that group anymore. So there is no kind of responsibility or commitment of those kind of admins to those groups. So we really wanted to focus on people who either created these groups, like as Hilda was saying, they wanted to create this online community. So they feel a pull towards it. They feel responsible for that online community. So working with them was quite important. So we really narrowed it down. But that does not mean the resources that we developed can't be used by admins and moderators or, interest-based groups. They can. I do want to flag also the fact that Facebook does have some resources for digital community stewards, but they are very much catered towards these interest-based groups, right? So it has topics like the Facebook training or the resources have topics like how do you grow your group? How do you create content? How do you get your members to talk? Which are, of course, relevant. But there's nothing on how do you make your group inclusive? Or how do you handle hate speech or misinformation? One of the best examples I can give you was during COVID, or rather, a lot of things happened during COVID. And one of the case studies that we got when we were developing these materials was during the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of the groups started sharing content about racism and discrimination. And I also noticed this in Sri Lanka, where a lot of the groups that I was a part of started sharing information about corruption and politics and things like that. Now, these are groups that are entirely about something else, right? It's about, women empowerment, veganism, whatever. So these admins and moderators didn't know what to do because some of them started deleting the post saying, hey, it's not, let's not have political discourse. But you can't do that, right? Because it pisses off some people, then other people get hurt. So there were issues like that. And there were no resources for these digital community stewards to navigate something like that. So that was one of the key reasons we wanted to create this curriculum, to address very specific issues like that. And to answer your other question about platforms, that I would say is not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's a limitation of this curriculum, but rather a boundary that we had. Because there are so many new platforms, right? There are so many platforms and communities exist in a lot of these platforms. We can't, if we try to make our content very specific, it'll be like a really long curriculum. I would say now that we've done this pilot curriculum, the responsibility is up to the rest of the world to take it forward and to kind of develop on it, right? Create a curriculum that's only for Zoom admins. Create a curriculum that's for Discord admins. What we did was create a very general curriculum because we didn't want it to be too specific so that other people can't use it. And also the fact that we have new platforms coming up like Threads. So the more specific we make it, the less useful it will be. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Dharini. Hilda, do you have anything to add on that front?
Yeah, maybe just to say, so yeah, no, we since we're like, as I was saying, like we're potentially talking about such a large group that we wanted to start somewhere, right? So that's why we started up with what we've even very broadly defined as like a community purpose, right? Like people who get together around some type of social purpose because they're committed to it and they want to build it out. What I would say is that even with that group, we would already, if it would be able to equip all the social digital stewards who manage that type of groups with the tools that we've developed now, I think that like it could be already in itself a game changer somehow, right? The shift that you could teach us from that. But I do think that even groups who are like, I don't know, like a parents association linked to a school group, whatever, like a Game of Thrones, like that, what even for them, there's a lot of things in here that could still be relevant and useful for those people, right? I think we would have probably a harder time to reach them, right? So this is where, how do we reach these target groups in a way that is engaging and that is authentic for them and doesn't sound like we're an NGO and we want to train you, because that's really not it, right? But we want to make it publicly available. But a lot of the dilemmas that Dharini was mentioning, even in like groups that are fan based or whatever, it may come up, right? So even for those people and those type of stewards, some of this may be relevant.
Thank you. And that's one thing I really appreciate about the digital community stewards training set up on Connexus is, as somebody who works on sort of stewarding the Connexus community, to be able to hop in and say, oh, this is something I'm thinking about. Boom, boom, boom. I can get to a resource and learn a bit more about it there. So thinking about sort of looking through the audience list, there are a lot of people that are given a lot of communities. Let's say they haven't seen the digital community stewards training yet, or this is the first time that they're hearing about this work. What are sort of the avenues that they should go next? Do they read the report, read through the whole training, email you? What would you suggest for people who want to both learn more about stewarding a digital community themselves, but then also for sharing these materials with others?
In terms of, if you want to be a digital community steward, or if you are a digital community steward, I think most of us are. We all have like a WhatsApp group of workers, and I have like 5, right? So for projects and whatever. So if you are a digital community steward, or if you're thinking of setting up an online group, a good place to start is to go through the curriculum to see some of the dilemmas. What are the dilemmas that, kind of speak out to you? Go through the topic. So each module or each topic has 3 specific skills or, capacities that you can learn. So go through the modules. That'd be a good idea, a good place to start. But if you are trying to work with digital community stewards, which is a fantastic way to kind of take this forward. When we were doing the TOT in May, one of the first things we learned was a lot of people didn't have a very good idea of the digital community stewardship in their community or in their country, right? It's very different. The way we would roll this training in Sri Lanka would be very different from how you would roll it in your own country. So a good place to start there is to look into the online communities in your own country. Think about, number one, what kind of platforms are being used for online communities? Is it mostly on WhatsApp? Is it mostly on Facebook? We had one participant during the TOT who was talking about how most of their community stewards are on Zoom, because that's the safest way for them to convene, right? For members to convene. So think about that. Think about the platform. And once you identify those community stewards or those platforms, think about what problems that they have. And the best way to do that is to talk to them, right? To have a focus group or to send a survey. Try to see what dilemmas or issues are most relevant to them. And then you can, kind of do a module or 2 and to see. And something that we haven't done ourselves, but I'm personally very excited to see other people do, is that we also were thinking about and discussing how online communities, especially for vulnerable groups, are safer, right? Easier to convene and safer, more accessible. So these modules can also be used to take groups that exist offline into online spaces. So if you are, let's say, a group of LGBTIQ or women activists, somebody who's, targeted for their identity or vocation. And if you're thinking of convening online, you know what? It's not easy for us to meet every week in person. Let's just create a Facebook group or a Zoom meeting. And if you have no idea how to do that, the curriculum is a good place to start. It helps you figure out what platforms are safe. How do you set up the platform? And it's also not just about creating the group. It's about sustaining the group, making sure people participate, making sure people feel that trust, making sure people feel connected, and most importantly, making sure people feel safe. So those are some ways in which you can use what we have created so far. But I'm sure that there are other ways we haven't thought of yet as well.
Yeah, and maybe to add something, Xander, because I'm sure a lot of people who are online and listening in are like in the peace building field also, right? Like that's the work that we do. And so what I would just urge us to do is that we start considering community stewards increasingly like as a key stakeholder for us to engage as peace builders, because they're really an untapped potential. They're able to reach people that we as NGO peace builders will never access, especially when it comes to certain minority groups within a community. And it's just the level of influence that they hold, and also the understanding that they have of issues that really keep communities, like what is on the top of the mind of certain communities. They can really be key allies. So, and I think we've seen that with some of the stewards that we've been able to engage with already in Dubai and afterwards. So I think we should just more structurally think us as peace builders, how can we integrate it into our own programming and intervention? And a practical way to start doing that, and that's one thing that we're trying to do now increasingly so with Search, is even like in a particular country or region, start mapping out who those stewards are, right? Often it's a group that we don't even have good visibility on. So we need to start better understanding, for example, in a set like a refugee camp in XYZ country, who are some of the stewards who animate some of the bigger groups there, and how can we start engaging with them, right?
Really great point. Thank you. I'm getting a few questions in the chat about people excited for the next version of the online course. Is there somewhere they should sign up, or just keep an eye out for Connexus emails? We'll share it when it's ready.
Yeah, we don't worry. We have plans to disseminate it, and I'm sure Connexus and Xander would support us in terms of getting it out there. And I do want to highlight that this online course would be very helpful in the sense that one of the biggest things that we learned about this target group is that they are very time poor individuals. So getting them for a physical training is very difficult because being a steward is not their job. They have other jobs, like full-time jobs. So they do this, the GovLab study we used called stewardship, a labor of love, right? They do it because they love the community and they want to be a part of it and they want to keep other people like themselves safe. So that's why we are creating the online course so that it's easier to access and it's self-paced. So we are very excited about it as well. And we are looking towards launching it towards the end of the year. We are currently designing the materials, we're designing the courses, and we're testing it out next week, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted. Don't worry.
And just to add, Xander, we also have the intent. So we're now working to move it into like an e-learning course, right? For now, the material is in English, but we're going to work on making it available at least in a couple of bigger language, like Arabic, French, Spanish, maybe Russian, some of these. And then we're definitely also said to some of our teams when there's a need. For example, we've been in conversation with some of our teams on the Swahili coast to translate it into Swahili. At least part of it, we can look into that just to make sure that it's useful for the biggest group possible.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to each of you for sharing. I love it when we do these webinars where we go from Belgium down to Sri Lanka, halfway back to Jordan. So really appreciate you and everybody who joined us today from, I think we have 40 some countries on the RSVP list. And so really those communities that are region or geographic based, how do we be helpful in that arena? So a huge thank you to each of you. Everyone, you're welcome back exactly next week, same time, on a fairly similar topic that might be helpful for a lot of these same people. We'll be exploring the Digital Peace Builders Guide with Julie Hutt from Build Up. But keep an eye out for an invitation to that. But last chance for last word. If there's anything else you all want to share, if not, can't thank you enough for joining us today. Perfect. All right. Thanks, team. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ender. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.